The mic's working. All right, I can hear myself now. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited to talk to you all. I feel like anyone could say we have some exciting innovators on stage. I would not say that unless I meant it. And I feel that way about all three of you. All of you have interesting backgrounds working on really tackling interesting problems. So I'm just super excited to have you here. We're talking about sustainable fashion. And I read a statistic that I wanted to bring up. I think the UN said more emissions come from the fashion industry than shipping and aviation combined. So all of that just so we can have these like sweet clothes. And you know, it's nice to like look good. That's cool. But it is like an awful problem. So we're gonna like try to reconcile that in a way or talk about what is potentially irreconcilable. So I wanted to start with Julie. You work in circularity, and I just wanted to start just off the bat and ask, will the H&Ms, the Zaras, and the Sheins of the world always be like fundamentally at odds with climate goals?
No, I don't think they can. I mean, our climate and our world and our planet, there's no way we can keep going in the pattern that we are without tapping into circularity. We have all the resources we need to make all the things, including fashion, in the future.
Do you think fast fashion can truly become sustainable?
I think it's a tough call, because what defines fast fashion? Does it define it from that there's just so much output and it's made at such a inexpensive rate that allows people to consume? I mean, I remember back in the 90s, and I went to a school where I had to wear a uniform, and one of 7, I didn't have many clothes, and when I did go to the store, it was really expensive. So what fast fashion has done is democratized it. And I think it's really important for the Zaras, and they're one of Circ's investors. We have a great partnership with them. It's really important for them to continue to make sustainable fashion, to turn the corner and make what they offer sustainable.
I'm curious, Jim, what do you think about fast fashion and the speed of fast fashion? Because we had talked earlier about this, and I think, you know, I don't want to split hairs too much on, because the definition could shift, but like, you know, isn't it kind of messed up the way we're doing things now? I mean, not that you were arguing otherwise, but I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Yeah, I think fast fashion is not good, and I don't think it's sustainable. I'm a guy of slow fashion. I bought this jacket when I was 14 years old. I'm now retired, which tells you how old I am. So I've had this for over 50 years. You just take care of it, and it will last. So a lot of this is about trying to inform people about the problems that are involved with fashion, but also to make them more thoughtful about what they wear. It isn't just about some instantaneous, instant gratification, but they should be more thoughtful about what it is that they're trying to project when they wear things as well. So it's trying to change the consumer's attitude towards fashion.
You know, one thing that's interesting is, there is time for us to mention like what everyone's working on. Obviously, for those who don't know, you work in like dyeing clothes with bacteria, basically a more sustainable way to deposit dyes onto fabrics without, you know, completely destroying natural waterways, all that sort of thing. Fast fashion has some fundamental big flaws, at least the way I think of it today. You've taken money from H&M. How do you balance that together?
Well, H&M is actually trying to do as much as they can do. It's always a balance between, you know, you have to make profit as your company.
I hope it's not my hair.
Is that me?
Oh, if we stay very still, it'll be fine.
I don't think my mic's on.
Oh, I think we might have lost a mic. We got a hand mic that we can bring up stage? Let's see.
Well, I can shout.
Oh, hold on.
No, I lecture for a living, so speaking out loud is part of the job. So now, you were talking about H&M.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Is that at odds?
No, it's not, because all companies have to make a profit, okay? They have invested a lot of money in trying to understand their supply chains and trying to understand how they can make them better for trying to make their clothes more sustainable. So they're making an effort. They're not a total greenwash. There are other aspects of the fashion industry that are greenwash, but they're trying. So no, it's not at odds. Can you hear me in the back? Okay, I don't need a mic.
Okay, we'll have it as a backup. We'll have the mic as a backup. Julie, you work in circularity.
Right.
Will you just talk a little bit more about, I'm just curious, how receptive have these big brands been when it comes to taking these old materials and turning them into new clothes?
Well, they're very receptive. I mean, the demand that we have for our product is tremendous. I mean, we cannot build it fast enough. We can't build the capacity fast enough. I think the challenge is the supply chain and how the brands operate it. So, for instance, they don't typically own their factories, and they rely on the tier 1s, 2s, 3s to do the innovation. And they are the brand and the design, and that's a very powerful situation to be in. And there is power of the brand because it influences each and every one of us and how we think, for whether you hate the brand or you love the brand. It does affect your actions. And one of the things that's really necessary to bring innovation to scale is to have the brands commit to the factories that make the fabric, that make the yarns that go into the products that they design and then market and sell, is to commit to them to take the offtakes. So for instance, we're building our first flagship facility to recycle polyester cotton. That's a very difficult textile to recycle because it's blended, but we're able to extract both the polyester stream and the cotton stream and make circular fibers from them. So basically never needing to tap into fossil fuels or cotton or trees in order to make these circular fibers. And so going through it over and over again and getting it to the point that it can scale, we need to build the flagship facility, and the way to get the funding for that is to ensure that you have your supply agreements going into the factory and your offtakes committed so that the investment community has confidence in investing in this, what is a capital-intensive endeavor.
Beth, I'd love for you to weigh in here on this. Can you remind me some of the companies you've worked with? Is Zara one of them?
No, but we've worked with H&M's, Weekday, Pangaya, Klinastrada, Ekas Lata, a few others that I'm not allowed to name yet, but look forward to in the future.
Sure. Well, what makes it difficult to, I guess I'm going at this question a little bit from the other side, but we have all of these technologies in development to at least, limit waste, limit pollution in fashion, but so much of the fashion industry continues to operate as it has, and there is quite a bit of waste, it's quite a bit of virgin plastics, it's just how it is. So what are some of the barriers that you're encountering, Beth, and I'm curious for the other people on stage, could you just talk a little bit about how do you, I guess I'm just wondering, what's the holdup?
Yeah, great question. I think we could have a long discussion about the various things that in play. Things are moving. Of course, they're not moving quickly enough, but what we're seeing, at least within brands, is a lot of excitement from the new, the innovation teams, the teams that are on the cutting edge. And I love that brands set up this way, where they have one side of their company that's, thinking about the status quo, keeping their company alive. And then at the other side, they have the people who are looking into innovation and how we can incorporate that into the status quo. Unfortunately, that handoff is not happening quickly enough. I think that's one of the struggles, is that you can, start a small pilot, you get 50, 100, 1,000 pieces, but to really scale up takes a bit of capital. So that's where what Julie's talking about, these offtake agreements, similar model for our company as well. You collect contracts and you prove to your investors there's demand here, and that's sort of how we function as a company and how we're starting to move things forward. But could always be faster. We happen to be in hardware, so there's always a little bit of extra time needed for hardware. But I think, it is actually happening fairly quickly when you look at the grand scheme of things.
Is cost a big barrier? I think we talked about this in our call earlier. We were talking earlier about this panel, and one of the things that came up repeatedly was just like fashion companies want to survive. And how do you invest in potentially more expensive ways of doing things, survive, meet all these goals, and without jacking up the prices? Or something's got to give. So I'm curious just what your thoughts are on that.
Well, we've found that brands are not really willing to go more than a year or 2 years without breaking even. You absolutely can't come in with something that's indefinitely going to be more expensive than the status quo. We've seen lots of polls out there that consumers will say, especially like Gen Z, we say, we really care about sustainability, we're going to change the way we purchase. But when you actually look at the purchases that happen, you don't see people standing behind that. They still want the thing that's cheaper. So we found that if we can get to cost parity in 12, 18 months, that we're able to sign these contracts very quickly.
Is that realistic? I'm curious about the green premium. This is a question for everyone on stage right now. Do your businesses rely on the green premium? That idea of like, well, you have to pay a little more to get something that's sustainable.
Well, I would say the green premium, it's more about the early adapters. So the reason commodity products are so inexpensive and what has allowed us to enjoy a level of fashion apparel, but not just fashion and apparel, it's your footwear, it's all the belongings around you that you consume, is because of scale and because of delivering to the masses. So what we're doing in the lab, and we're well beyond the lab at Circ, but it's no comparison to look at polyester that is manufactured at thousands and thousands of tons a day in one unit and compare it to a 200 ton per day unit. It's just, it's simple math and engineering that you're gonna have a higher unit cost in capital with the smaller capacity. So, but you need to prove that your technology does scale. And at scales, we're building the first commercial facility, but it's still not going to be it's going to be the blueprint that's going to scale globally at the thousands of tons. But it's also like one of the things that I think, that is important to recognize is just how these products and all these technologies are coming together. So I have to compliment Beth on her amazing pants that I want to get a pair, but these came off her 3D weaving, right? And it's just like, how can you create these sustainable fashion that the consumer is demanding it? So the regulation that's going on in Europe is driving the market pull because the brands are being held accountable to deliver sustainable solutions, to stop creating 10% of greenhouse gases. But it has to go beyond the guilt and the pushing. It has to go on as what's that consumer experience that really enables everyone to be mindful about what they are buying and still have that same level of dopamine that shopping gives us.
Does it feel like, like pushing a boulder up a hill?
Yes and no. Yes, it does sometimes feel like pushing a boulder uphill, but it depends on where the hill is. Okay, so scale is a real issue. If you don't get to scale, you can't get to the price point that you want. In Europe, we're pretty close to being cost competitive with chemical dyeing. In Asia, not true at all. It's different hills. So it depends where you're really aiming.
Sure, but in the end, it's just to double check. Are you hearing Jim back there? No. Okay. Will you use the mic then?
Sure. Is it on?
Let's.
Oh, no. Now, can you hear me now?
Yeah. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Thanks. Yeah.
Right.
You were saying?
So yes, it is like pushing a boulder uphill, but it depends on where the hill is. In Europe, like I said, for us, going to scale will probably be okay because we're close to cost competitiveness with the chemical dye industry now. In Asia, not even close. Okay, so it depends is kind of the answer.
How on earth do you make a difference in Asia with your technology? How do you compete in order to make a difference?
Part of this is coming back to the scale issue. If you can scale and you can get it to the point where you are at that point, you can drive the cost down. But until you get to that point, you have to be in some kind of market where you can exist.
What concerns y'all more? Because sometimes I think about, I mean, I live in sort of a bubble. I live in LA on the east side. Everyone's queer. Everyone's talking about sustainability and climate change and having their own existential crisis as they learn about the realities that we face with, rapidly changing climate. What concerns you more in what you do? Is it getting the brands on board, or is it people changing their behavior in order to, obviously those things feed into themselves, but does one take up more of your headspace than the other?
For me, yes. I mean, getting people to understand the problems and to be more thoughtful about their purchasing power concerns me more than getting brands on board. Because at the end of the day, if the consumer can drive what the brands want, then that will happen. But unfortunately, trying to educate people is much, much more difficult than you might imagine.
Beth, Julie, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, my focus has really been on brands. I do love that you have faith in consumers. I guess I have a little less faith in all of us. Yeah, brands are really where the change for us, at least, will happen. And going back to your analogy about pushing rocks uphill, we're the brands, the contract manufacturers, and us, Unspun, we are pushing that boulder up together. We're basically splitting costs on that CapEx that's required to get us to that cost parity within a year. So that's really how we've done that.
Curious what your thoughts are on this.
Well, so I've been a chemical engineer for over 30 years, and no time in my career have I had such a strong market pull. So you always hear about the technology push and the market pull. It's just pull, pull, pull. Now, that said, we do go up mountains because we are a venture-backed company, and as was described earlier on the panel, is you do need to deliver, and what the team has done together over the last 4 years to bring our technology from recycling one t-shirt a day to over thousands and thousands of t-shirts a day has been incredible. And the biggest challenge, and they also talked about the team, is ensuring that we don't get in our own ways. That, yes, there's a lot that we could say this won't work, or we don't know how to do it, or this or that, but that there has to be more hope and optimism than that, because this planet is worth saving, and all these technologies, I also feel like we're not competitors. I want to take Beth's solution and Jim's solution and tie it all into this beautiful zero liquid discharge, zero carbon facility that's an end-to-end textile recycling.
I'm curious also, just when it comes to having such extensive backgrounds in science, on the academic side, there's a lot of poking and examining and interrogating, and then you come into the business world, and sometimes I'm sure the academics can be plenty political in its own way. Do you have to soften how you talk about these things? I'm just curious. Is there? You're chuckling, Beth. So I don't.
Well, I think it's been a little frustrating being in the industry where there are no hard facts. It's a lot of brand-driven things. We just can't really track a lot of the information that we need, and a lot of brands, it doesn't make sense for them to kind of disclose their numbers. And so we're often making a lot of decisions on, word of mouth, or I get out of a meeting that I've heard what their experience is, and I kind of have to extrapolate that across the whole industry. And it's sometimes it's kind of embarrassing to want to have a really deep discussion and just to say well, well, I've heard somewhere in some sources that maybe we're at 4% of the global carbon emissions, and I've heard other places it's 10%. So I think that's been one of my biggest frustrations. I mean, of course, there's everything we're working on, but just from like a kind of scientific lens, we really need just better data.
Y'all have thoughts on this?
Oh, yes, quite a few.
Let them rip. Come on.
Well, okay, so, you know, I ran a lab in Cambridge for 30 years. The science really hasn't changed, but what changes going into the space that I'm in now is that we've turned into engineers. So it's not quite as perhaps dramatic as you guys. The brand, since we have an advantage being in, well, sort of in Europe, unless you count Brexit, because the brands exist in Europe. So we have less of a problem trying to communicate with them. We're working in Portugal that work in dye houses that work with the brands anyway. So we have less of a problem with brands than you guys do, simply by geography. On the other hand, the science part of it hasn't really changed. It's now that our design briefs are engineering, so it's an engineering problem rather than one of pure science of just observation and experimentation.
Julie, what are your thoughts on?
I don't really think it's how we're talking about things. I will say in academia, and I did a stint in academia, and there is a tremendous amount of pressure to ensure that you're an individual contributor. So you do all this work, you develop students, which I love, but it's still an I versus a we. And that's the difference when you jump over into industry, is that in commercialization, it has to be a team. It has to be a team that's seamless in order to bring it, because it really is about the execution. You're going to always have challenges and opportunities. Yes, we call them problems, but they're just opportunities to innovate against. And so we've had really tight timelines to deliver for products. So I'm wearing one of them that was launched in May and Milan Design Week, and it was a collab with Zara. So we made it into the label, right, which is huge. And that's, those are the types of things that the brands can do, because it's important that the technology and the companies and the entrepreneurs, that we continue to grow our values so that we can deliver on the commercialization of these technologies and then bring them all together, because it is an ecosystem.
Are you hopeful that Zara will see the results of this collaboration and say, like, you know what, let's do more?
Yes, they already are. I mean, they're a great collaborator. We love them.
But in the scope of Zara, which is this massive company, what do you feel is the impact of that, right? Because if you got to start somewhere. I don't want to belittle that in any way. I'm just curious, is it a drop in the bucket when it comes, or is that diminishing it in an unfair way?
They put out a commitment that by 2030 they're going to have all recycled materials.
Okay.
And with that, we have to build a lot of factories, which is exciting. I mean, I think back to the technology. What we've innovated is around a system, and we've innovated in bringing disparate industries together. And what is really comforting or reassuring and reducing risk for scaling this is that many of these technologies were available in the 90s. And you could recycle in the 90s, but no one wanted to. It was like too expensive. I remember being told by managers and leaders, it's just like, it doesn't make sense to put that recycle line in. Right. Now, to be able to create a factory that truly is green, that pulls from renewable energy, that uses everything it makes and sends it back for all the byproducts, is exciting. And the brands that can be a force of good are going to support us to get there.
Speaking of the brands that can or might not be a force of good, I'm curious, in the audience, has anyone here shopped Shein?
You can admit it.
We got one person, two. Anyone else? No other Shein buyers? Three? You got a few. Four,
statistically,
five.
There should be more, right?
There should be more. I bring them up for a very specific reason. They've exploded on TikTok, doing massive amounts of sales. And whenever I go there, I haven't bought anything from there. That's honestly probably because I had trouble finding my size more than it was from a conscious decision, because I find it tempting. I see something and it is difficult to resist just buying it. But the prices are just insane. I mean, the prices, it's like a couple bucks for something that's going to be in for the next couple months. It's like a niche cottage core thing. And I get why people are going there for those things. But does the emergence of that kind of company at the same time as these opportunities to recycle, to reuse materials, to change how we produce clothes, at the same time you've got like the polar opposite happening, where it's like just like the this wildly cheap place to shop. What do you think of that? Is that your competitor in a way? Is that you're competing with the Sheins of the world?
I don't know. I mean, I won't let my 14-year-old daughter shop there, and I think it's disheartening that things are so cheap, and they're cheap because of where, how are they making them so cheap? They're making it cheap because of not having sustainable labor. So where are the labor rates going? The materials, are they making changes on quality? So really being able to access sustainable fashion and education of what fast fashion does and what the overconsumption does is going to need to continue to be made, but we're going to have to make it really attractive for the average consumer to want it, because we're programming people to have rapid, immediate, if you have a need and you want a new design, you can get it tomorrow and have it delivered.
And really the way they've made it so cheap is getting around regulation and obviously we all know about exploitation, but specifically homework is kind of what some people call it, craft work, where you don't necessarily have to make things in factories in certain parts of the world where they just need the money. So people are assigned, make these 200 dresses, and legally we also don't have to pay you by hour. So it's by piece rate. So they just get paid per garment, no matter how long it takes you. So it's automatically very, very cheap because of where this is coming from. And it's very much a broken system. But I think that demand is really not going to stop anytime soon. Like I really admire Jim, and I wish we could all be like Jim and like appreciate our clothing. And that's something that at Unspun we also aspire to do. But I think there's, with social media, the push there and the push for the global population, the middle class increasing there, this is just a huge wave that none of us are going to be able to stop. So how do we work with that? How do we make sure that all of that increasing demand could be sustainable, and however we define it in a way, how could the earth continue to sustain this behavior? And I think the ways that we think about recycling are really going to be how it works. Right now we have a very, very linear model for our industry. Once you turn something into a garment, you've downgraded it. It's now trash, essentially, because things either get trashed, burned, or sent to another country where they don't want it. So it's never really, unless you can find a solution like the solutions we're working on, it's really not going back. So if we can create those circular life cycles, if we can think differently about the value chain, that something has the same value, whether it's the beginning of life or the end of life, that's when I think we can sustain terrible models like Shein. There might be a future for it. We'll see.
Jim, I'm curious, you mentioned, especially in our calls, we've talked a few times, I love this jacket. I want this jacket for myself. I want, it's
According
yours.
to Jonathan Chung, who used to be the head designer at Levi's, this is a design classic.
It is, very much so. I mean, it's an admirable jacket. What do you think about changing the minds, the hearts and minds? How on earth do you do that when the alternative is like wild convenience?
I think part of this is that this audience and this whole event is very focused around US, Europe,
Sure.
nations that are wealthy. Okay, that's not most of the world. And unfortunately, most people don't get a glimpse of the rest of the world, which they don't have what we have. A lot of the places where we're going to have to work are places where the people don't make a lot of money. They can exploit cheap labor and cheap materials and no legislation. So they can get away with a lot of things that would otherwise be very expensive in Europe or in North America. Okay, so the US offloaded all of their textile dyeing in the 60s to Asia. That was a purposeful move. Unfortunately, it has consequences, and a lot of it's about labor and exploitation. And so I wish people could go and see some of these places and see what the real cost is of what they're buying. It's not just, oh, I can buy this because I feel good about it for myself. Think about who put all the labor into making that thing. And labor is still exploited regardless of where you're getting your clothing from, pretty much.
So really, education is a big thing.
People need to be educated and be thoughtful about what it is they're buying.
This has been awesome. I wish we could talk more, but we're going to be either going to come out with a cane and hook us off. But this is just getting into the meat. So I would love to talk with all of you more later. And thank you so much for being here. I loved this conversation. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.